He spent 27 years behind bars. They gave him the hardest labor. They censored his letters, denied him his family, tried to erase his very name from history. They did everything in their power to break Nelson Mandela, but they could not. If stories like these bring you comfort, please subscribe to our channel where new biographies await you here each week. And in the comments, tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And which figure from history should we explore together next? Now, let us travel to a small island prison, 6 miles off the coast of Cape Town. The year is 1964, and a man sits on a thin mat in a cell barely wider than his outstretched arms. He is 46 years old. He has just been sentenced to life imprisonment. The wardens have told him he will die here, forgotten. Yet this man will do something extraordinary. He will endure nearly 3 decades of stone dust and isolation. He will emerge not with hatred, but with grace. He will become president of the very nation that imprisoned him, and he will choose reconciliation over revenge. The world will ask, how? What made him unbreakable? The answer lives in his story, in a childhood beside African rivers, in courtrooms and underground hideouts, in words that echoed across continents. This is the bedtime biography of Nelson Mandela. Chapter 1. The Boy Called Troublemaker. July 18, 1918. In the village of Mvezo, beside the winding Mbashe River in the Transkei region of South Africa, a child enters the world. His mother, Nosekeni, holds him close as the morning light filters through the rondavel's thatched roof. His father, Gadla Henry Mfakanyiswa, a counselor to the Thembu king, looks upon his son with quiet pride. They name him Rolihlahla. In the Xhosa language, it means pulling the branch of a tree. Colloquially, troublemaker. The name, it seems, knows something the parents do not yet understand. Rolihlahla grows up in Kunu, a collection of huts scattered across rolling green hills. Here, the world is simple and vast all at once. He herds cattle and sheep, their bells tinkling as they graze. He swims in clear streams with other boys, their laughter carried on the wind. He learns to fight with sticks, to track animals, to read the land. His father has 4 wives, and Rolihlahla is raised among many siblings in the traditional way. Though his family is royal, connected to the Thembu chieftaincy, their life is not one of luxury. They farm, they work, they live close to the earth. But something shifts when Rolihlahla is 9 years old. His father falls ill, his body weakening with each passing month. By the time the boy turns 12, Gadla Henry dies, likely from lung disease, leaving his son at a crossroads. The regent of the Thembu people, Jongintaba Dalindiebo, remembers an old debt. Years before, Rolihlahla's father had recommended him for the chieftaincy. Now, Jongintaba honors that friendship by adopting the young boy. And so Rolihlahla leaves Kunu. He climbs into a motor car, the first he has ever seen, and travels to Mkekezweni, the great place, the royal residence. He looks back at his village, at the hills he has known, and fears he will never see them again. The carefree life of a herd boy ends. Another life, one that will shape a nation, begins. Chapter 2. The Making of Nelson. The great place at Mkekezweni is unlike anything the boy has known. Here there are grand halls and visiting dignitaries. Here tribal elders gather to settle disputes, their voices rising and falling like a careful music. The regent, Jongintaba, treats Rolihlahla not as a charity case, but as a son, equal to his own boy, Justice. At night, sitting by the fire, Rolihlahla listens. The elders speak of the old days, before the white man came with his guns and his laws. They tell stories of Xhosa warriors who fought to defend their land, of chiefs who stood tall against impossible odds. They speak of resistance and dignity, of battles lost but never surrendered. The boy absorbs these stories, like rain into dry earth. When the time comes for school, Rolihlahla walks into a small classroom where a teacher named Miss Mdingane stands waiting. It is the custom in those days to give African children English names, something the British educational system demands, as if their own names are not enough. Miss Mdingane looks at the boy and says simply, "Your name will be Nelson." And so it is. Rolihlahla becomes Nelson. He does not question it. This is how things are done. He moves through his education with quiet determination. First at the local mission school, then at Clarkberry Boarding Institute, where he sleeps in dormitories and studies by lamplight. The curriculum is British, English literature, European history, but Nelson learns eagerly. Education, he begins to understand, is a kind of power. At 16, he transfers to Healdtown, a Methodist boarding school of some reputation. Here, the students wear proper uniforms. They play sports. They debate. Nelson grows taller, his voice deepens, and he becomes aware of the world beyond the Transkei, a world where black South Africans are not regarded as people with rights, but as laborers to be managed. Still, his path seems clear. The regent has plans for him, a good education, followed by a role in the tribal administration. Perhaps one day he will serve as a counselor, as his father did. In 1939, Nelson arrives at the University College of Fort Hare, the only higher education institution for black students in South Africa. It is a privilege to be there. He studies for a Bachelor of Arts degree, learning history and politics, joining the Students' Representative Council. But then comes a student protest. The students demand better food, better conditions. The administration refuses. The Students' Representative Council resigns in protest, and new elections are held. Nelson is re-elected, but he knows the students want representatives who will refuse to cooperate with the administration. He makes a choice. He joins a boycott of the new council. The university expels him. When Nelson returns to Mkhekezweni, the regent is furious. He has invested in this boy's future. He has given him everything, and now Nelson has thrown it away for what? A protest over cafeteria food? Yongintaba gives him an ultimatum. Return to Fort Hare and complete your degree, or accept the wife I have arranged for you and settle into tribal life. Nelson looks at the regent, the man who raised him, and realizes he cannot do either. One night, he and his cousin Justice make a plan. They will run away. They will go to Johannesburg, the Golden City, where a man can disappear and start over. They leave before dawn, taking what little they have, heading toward a future neither can imagine. The journey is just beginning. Chapter 3. Flight to Johannesburg. The year is 1941, and two young men board a train heading northwest. Nelson and his cousin Justice have stolen away from the great place with a plan half formed and pockets nearly empty. They are running toward freedom, though neither quite knows what freedom means yet. Johannesburg rises before them like a fever dream. The Golden City, they call it, built on the wealth extracted from deep mines, where black men labor in darkness. The buildings tower higher than anything Nelson has seen. Cars flood the streets. The air tastes of coal smoke and possibility. But possibility does not pay for food or shelter. Nelson's first job is as a night watchman at Crown Mines, standing guard over the very gold that has built this city on the backs of men who look like him. The work is simple, solitary. He watches the darkness and thinks about what comes next. It does not take long for the regent to find them. Yongintaba's reach extends even here, and word spreads quickly. But Nelson does not return. He has tasted something in this city, not quite freedom, but the shape of it. Through a stroke of fortune, he meets a man named Walter Sisulu. Walter is a few years older, a real estate agent with a sharp mind and connections throughout Johannesburg's black community. More importantly, Walter is politically active, already involved with the African National Congress, already thinking about how to dismantle the system that keeps their people subjugated. Walter sees something in Nelson. Perhaps it is the earnestness, the hunger to learn. Perhaps it is the bearing. Even broke and freshly arrived, Nelson carries himself with a certain dignity. Walter arranges a job for him at a law firm, Witkin, Sadelsky, and Eidelman. Nelson becomes a clerk, learning the law from the ground up. He watches how the white lawyers construct their arguments, how they navigate the legal system that both protects and oppresses. He begins to understand that law can be a weapon, wielded in either direction. The firm's senior partner, Lazar Sadelsky, is a white Jew who treats Nelson with an unusual respect. He encourages the young man to complete his BA degree through correspondence with the University of South Africa. He sees potential where others might see just another black clerk. And so Nelson studies at night after long days at the firm. He reads law books by lamplight in the small room he rents. The city educates him in ways Fort Hare never could, not just in statutes and precedents, but in the daily realities of apartheid, in the quiet dignity of those who resist. At Walter Sisulu's house, he meets other young activists. He meets a trainee nurse named Evelyn Mays, serious and kind. He begins to imagine a life here. The boy from Kunu is becoming someone new. Not quite a lawyer yet, not quite a revolutionary, but the city is teaching him, day by day, who he might become. Chapter 4. Lawyer and Revolutionary. In October 1944, Nelson Mandela marries Evelyn Mays in a modest ceremony. They move into a small house in Orlando, a township on the outskirts of Johannesburg, where houses stand in neat rows like promises half kept. Their first child, a son they name Thembi, arrives in February 1945. A daughter, Makaziwe, follows in 1947, though she will die of meningitis before her first birthday, a grief that settles quietly into the household. Nelson works. He studies. He completes his BA degree through correspondence in 1943, then enrolls at the University of the Witwatersrand to study law. He is one of the few black students on campus, walking halls, where he is watched with suspicion and curiosity in equal measure. But something else is happening, something that will alter the course of his life more than any degree. In 1942, Nelson joined the African National Congress, an organization founded in 1912 to advocate for black South Africans' rights. At first, his involvement is peripheral, attending meetings, listening to speeches. But in 1944, he helps establish the ANC Youth League alongside Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo, and others. The Youth League believes the ANC has been too patient, too polite. They push for mass action, for boycotts and strikes. They want the organization to become a movement. Oliver Tambo becomes Nelson's closest friend. Where Nelson is tall and commanding, Oliver is thoughtful and methodical. They complement each other perfectly, spending long evenings debating politics and philosophy, imagining a different South Africa. Then, in 1948, everything changes. The National Party wins the general election on a platform of apartheid, apartness in Afrikaans. What had been informal racial oppression now becomes systematized, codified into law. The new government passes act after act, where black people can live, where they can work, whom they can marry, where they can die. every aspect of life becomes regulated by race. The Group Areas Act divides cities into racial zones. The Population Registration Act classifies every South African by race. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act makes interracial marriage illegal. The pass laws require black South Africans to carry documents proving they have permission to be where they are. It is oppression made bureaucratic, violence made legal. Nelson's law studies take on new urgency. In 1952, he and Oliver Tambo opened the first black-owned law firm in South Africa, Mandela and Tambo. Their office becomes a refuge for people brutalized by apartheid. Wrongful arrests, past law violations, forced removals. The waiting room is always full. Nelson loves the work, but finds it heartbreaking. He can win individual cases, but the system itself remains unchanged, churning out injustice as efficiently as the mines produce gold. At home, the marriage grows strained. Evelyn wants a husband who comes home at reasonable hours, who focuses on family. But Nelson is increasingly consumed by politics, by meetings that run late into the night, by the growing conviction that legal work alone will never be enough. The lawyer and the revolutionary are becoming the same person, and the government is watching. Chapter 5. The Defiance Builds. The laws come one after another, each more suffocating than the last. By the early 1950s, apartheid has metastasized from policy into a complete system of control. There are beaches for whites, beaches for blacks, buses for whites, buses for blacks, hospitals, schools, park benches, all segregated. A black person can be arrested simply for sitting in the wrong place, for walking down the wrong street after curfew, for forgetting their passbook at home. The indignity is the point. The system is designed not just to separate, but to humiliate. In this climate, the ANC Youth League's calls for mass action gain traction. The older guard, who have spent decades writing polite letters to the government, begin to listen to these younger voices demanding something more forceful. In 1950, the government passes the Suppression of Communism Act, a vague piece of legislation that allows them to ban any organization or individual they deem a threat. The definition of communist is conveniently broad enough to include anyone who opposes apartheid. Nelson watches as activists are banned, restricted to their homes, forbidden from attending gatherings. The state is preparing for war, even if they call it law and order. Then comes 1952 and the Defiance Campaign. The ANC, working alongside the South African Indian Congress, organizes a campaign of civil disobedience. The strategy is simple: deliberately break unjust laws, enter spaces marked Europeans only, refuse to carry passes, court arrest, fill the prisons until the system cannot function. Nelson is chosen as the national volunteer-in-chief, with Malvi Kachalia as his deputy. He is 34 years old, a lawyer with a growing reputation and a wife who barely sees him anymore. The campaign begins on June 26, 1952. Across the country, volunteers march into whites-only areas, sit on whites-only benches, enter through whites-only entrances. They do not fight back when the police arrive. They go peacefully to the police vans, singing freedom songs as they are driven away. Nelson travels constantly, organizing volunteers, giving speeches, coordinating with other leaders. He has never felt more alive, more certain of his purpose. The campaign is nonviolent, disciplined. They are proving that black South Africans can organize, can resist, can refuse to cooperate with their own oppression. By the end of the year, more than 8,000 volunteers have been arrested. The prisons overflow. The campaign attracts international attention. For a moment, it seems as though the government might be forced to negotiate. But the government does not negotiate. Instead, they crack down harder. In July, Nelson and 19 others are arrested and charged under the Suppression of Communism Act. The trial drags on for months. In December, they are found guilty and sentenced to 9 months of hard labor, suspended for 2 years. The message is clear. The sentence hangs over their heads like a sword. One more act of defiance, and they go to prison. Nelson also receives his first banning order. He is prohibited from attending gatherings of more than a few people. He cannot leave Johannesburg without permission. He cannot speak at public meetings. The government is trying to silence him without the spectacle of imprisonment. But silence is not in his nature. In August 1952, before the trial concludes, he and Oliver Tambo open their law firm. The office is in a building in central Johannesburg, though the Group Areas Act will soon force them to relocate to a more remote location away from the white business district. Still, for now, they have a practice. The firm becomes legendary. People line up outside before dawn, workers who have been cheated of wages, families facing forced removals, men arrested for pass law violations. Nelson takes cases other lawyers will not touch. He fights police brutality cases, defends political activists, challenges evictions. His reputation grows. In court, he is commanding, well-dressed, articulate. White judges sometimes forget, for a moment, that they are meant to see him as inferior. Then they remember, and their faces harden. At home, the distance between Nelson and Evelyn widens. She has become a Jehovah's Witness, finding solace in faith, while her husband finds purpose in politics. They argue about his absences, his priorities. 2 more children arrive, a daughter, Makaziwe, named for the daughter they lost, and a son, Magatho, but the joy is shadowed by tension. Nelson knows he is failing as a husband, as a father, but he also knows he cannot stop. The work is too urgent. Every day brings new injustices, new arrests, new families torn apart by apartheid laws. Late at night, after Evelyn and the children are asleep, he sits at the small table and writes. Letters to other activists, plans for future campaigns, legal briefs. The lamp burns low, casting long shadows across the page. He is a lawyer, he is a husband, he is a father. But increasingly, he is something else, something the government fears, something they are determined to destroy. The banning orders multiply. The surveillance intensifies. Plainclothes police follow him through the streets. His phone, he assumes, is tapped. The system is tightening around him, but he does not bend. Not yet. Not ever, he tells himself, though he does not yet know what that defiance will cost. Chapter 6. The Black Pimpernel, March 21, 1960. In the township of Sharpeville, south of Johannesburg, a crowd gathers at the police station. They are protesting the pass laws, the hated documents that black South Africans must carry at all times, proof of permission to exist in their own country. The protest is peaceful, organized by the Pan-Africanist Congress, a group that has broken away from the ANC. The police open fire. 69 people die. Most are shot in the back, running away. Among the dead are women and children. The photographs spread across the world. Bodies lying in the dust, blood pooling on the street. South Africa erupts. Riots, strikes, demonstrations. The government declares a state of emergency. They ban the ANC. They ban the PAC. They arrest thousands. For Nelson Mandela and his comrades, everything changes in that moment. For years, they have pursued nonviolent resistance, believing that moral pressure and disciplined protest would eventually force the government to negotiate. But Sharpeville reveals the truth. The government will kill before it will listen. In the wake of the massacre, Nelson goes underground. He grows a beard. He wears overalls and a chauffeur's cap, disguising himself as a driver or a gardener. He moves from safe house to safe house, never sleeping in the same place twice. The press begins calling him the Black Pimpernel, after the elusive hero of British adventure novels. He lives now at Lily's Leaf Farm in Rivonia, a suburb north of Johannesburg. The farm belongs to Arthur Goldreich, a white activist sympathetic to the cause. Here, hidden among fruit trees and outbuildings, Nelson can work without constant surveillance. He uses the name David. During these months, he becomes convinced that nonviolence alone is no longer viable. The government has made peaceful resistance impossible. Every march ends in arrests or bullets. Every protest is met with batons and dogs. In June 1961, the ANC leadership meets to discuss forming an armed wing. There is fierce debate. The ANC has been committed to nonviolence since its founding. But Nelson argues that they must meet force with force, at least symbolically, not a war against people, but sabotage against property, power stations, government buildings, infrastructure. The proposal is accepted, though not without reservation. Those who wish to participate will do so separately from the ANC itself. Plausible deniability, they hope, though everyone knows the connection. They name the new organization Umkhonto weSizwe, Spear of the Nation. Nelson becomes its first commander. On December 16, 1961, bombs explode at government buildings in Johannesburg, Port Elizabeth, and Durban. The explosions are timed for night, when the buildings are empty. No one is killed. Leaflets are left behind, explaining that this is a new phase of resistance, that the government has left them no choice. In January 1962, Nelson leaves South Africa illegally, traveling to Ethiopia for a conference of African liberation movements. He meets other revolutionaries, leaders who have fought colonial powers and won. He undergoes military training in Algeria, learning about guerrilla warfare, sabotage, organization. In London, he reunites with Oliver Tambo, now leading the ANC in exile. They talk late into the night about strategy, about the long war ahead. In July, Nelson returns to South Africa, slipping back across the border. 3 weeks later, on August 5, 1962, he is driving near Howick in Natal when police set up a roadblock. They are waiting for him. Years later, it will emerge that the CIA tipped off the South African authorities. The charade is over. David is gone. Nelson Mandela is under arrest. Chapter 7. Arrest and First Imprisonment. The police van carries him to Johannesburg, then to Pretoria. In the holding cells, Nelson sits in silence, thinking about what comes next. He has been underground for 17 months. Now, suddenly, he is visible again, a man in handcuffs, facing charges that could mean life in prison. The trial begins in October 1962. He is charged with inciting workers to strike and leaving the country without a permit. Simple charges, but the sentence could still be severe. Nelson makes a decision. He will conduct his own defense. He will turn the courtroom into a stage, the trial into an indictment of apartheid itself. He appears in court wearing traditional Xhosa clothing, a leopard skin kaross draped over his shoulders. The courtroom stirs. Here is a defiant African, refusing to play by their rules, refusing even to dress in their manner. He does not deny the charges. Instead, he explains why he broke their laws. He speaks of Sharpeville, of past laws, of children dying from malnutrition while the government spends millions on weapons. He speaks for hours, his voice steady and clear. On November 7th, the magistrate delivers the verdict. Guilty on both counts. The sentence, 5 years of hard labor. 5 years. It could have been worse. It will become worse. Nelson is taken first to Pretoria local prison, then, in May 1963, transferred briefly to Robben Island. The island sits in the cold Atlantic, 6 miles off the coast of Cape Town. It has been a place of exile for centuries. Lepers, political prisoners, the unwanted. A warder greets him with undisguised contempt. "This is the island. This is where you will die." Nelson says nothing. He works in the lime quarry, smashing stone under the harsh sun. The conditions are brutal, but he has already accepted that this is his life now. Then, inexplicably, after just weeks on the island, he is returned to Pretoria in June 1963. No explanation is given. He is placed in isolation, wondering what has changed. He does not know that police have raided Liliesleaf Farm. He does not know that documents have been seized, that his comrades have been arrested. He does not know that the worst is still coming. Chapter 8. I am prepared to die. July 1963, police raid Liliesleaf Farm in Rivonia, arresting the leadership of Umkhonto we Sizwe. They find documents, plans, evidence of sabotage operations. Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Ahmed Kathrada, and others are taken into custody. On October 9, 1963, they are brought to trial. Nelson Mandela, already serving his 5-year sentence, is added to the dock. The charge, sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. The potential sentence, death. The Rivonia Trial, as it comes to be known, attracts international attention. Protesters gather outside the courthouse. Governments issue statements. The world is watching. Nelson and his co-accused make a decision. He will not testify as a witness, which would subject him to cross-examination. Instead, he will make a statement from the dock, a speech that cannot be interrupted, cannot be challenged. For weeks, he writes, he drafts and redrafts, working mostly in his cell by lamplight. The writer Nadine Gordimer and journalist Anthony Sampson help him polish the language. His lawyers review it nervously. The final paragraph particularly troubles them. "It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." They fear it will provoke the judge into handing down a death sentence. But Nelson refuses to remove it. They will hang him or they will not. Either way, he will speak his truth. April 20th, 1964. Nelson stands in the dock and begins to read. His voice is measured, deliberate. For over 3 hours, he speaks without interruption. He explains the history of the ANC's nonviolent resistance. He describes Sharpeville, the banning of peaceful protest. He justifies the turn to sabotage, not from love of violence, but from necessity. He details the poverty and oppression of black South Africans under apartheid. And then, near the end, he speaks the words that will echo across decades. "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Silence fills the courtroom. From the gallery, a sound rises, something between a sigh and a groan. Chapter 9. Sentenced to forever. The trial continues through the autumn of 1964. Witnesses testify. Evidence is presented. The accused sit in the dock day after day, knowing that the outcome is already decided. The only question is whether they will hang. Judge Quartus DeWitt presides, his face impassive. Throughout Nelson's speech, he avoided eye contact, looking down at his notes, at the papers before him. Only at the final words, "I am prepared to die," did Nelson look directly at the judge, forcing that moment of recognition between them. Now they wait. The government wants blood. The prosecutor, Percy Utar, has built his case methodically, presenting sabotage as the first step toward violent revolution. He paints the accused as terrorists, as communist conspirators bent on destroying white civilization in South Africa. But the world is watching. International pressure mounts. Governments send private messages to South Africa. The British Prime Minister considers intervention. Student groups protest. The United Nations debates resolutions. In South Africa itself, people hold their breath. Black townships prepare for the worst. If these men hang, there will be uprisings. The government knows this. They have troops on standby. June 11, 1964. The courtroom fills early. Journalists crowd the press gallery. In the public seats, families and supporters gather. Winnie Mandela, still young, her face composed but her hands trembling. The mothers and wives and children of the other accused. Judge DeWitt enters. Everyone rises. The verdict is read first. On all major charges, guilty. Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Raymond Malaba, Elias Motsoaledi, Andrew Mlangeni, Ahmed Kathrada, Dennis Goldberg, all guilty of sabotage and conspiracy. Then comes the sentencing. The judge speaks briefly. He acknowledges that the prosecution has asked for the supreme penalty. He notes the seriousness of the crimes. And then, without elaboration, he pronounces sentence, life imprisonment. The word life hangs in the air, not death, but something that might feel worse, decades upon decades, perhaps until they die of old age in prison cells, forgotten. There's a moment of stunned silence and then chaos. From the gallery, people cry out, relief, anguish, anger all mixed together. Winnie's face crumples. The families embrace. Outside, crowds that have been waiting erupt in confused celebration. They are alive. The men will live, but they will not be free. The convicted are taken immediately. No time for proper goodbyes, no final embraces. They are loaded into a police van, the doors clanging shut behind them. The drive takes them to an airfield. A military plane waits. They fly south to Cape Town, the cabin filled with armed guards. Through the windows, they can see the coastline, the mountains. Table Mountain rising above the city like a sentinel. Then the plane descends, and they land. Another van, another drive, this time to the docks. A ferry waits, its engines already rumbling. They board, and the boat pulls away from land, heading northwest into the Atlantic. Robben Island grows larger on the horizon, flat, colorless, ringed with gray beaches and harsh scrub. The prison buildings squat in the center, surrounded by nothing but wind and sea. As they disembark, a prison warder steps forward. He looks at them with undisguised contempt and speaks words designed to crush whatever hope remains. This is the island. This is where you will die. Nelson and his comrades are processed. Their civilian clothes are taken. They are given shorts, not long trousers, which are reserved for Indian and colored prisoners. Black prisoners must wear shorts and sandals, even in winter. Even this small dignity is denied. They are classified as D-group prisoners, the lowest category. This means the fewest privileges, the harshest treatment, the worst rations. One letter every 6 months. One 30-minute visit every 6 months. Isolation from the world. Nelson is assigned to Section B, a single-story building with a corridor of cells. His cell is number 5. The space measures roughly 2 meters by 2 meters. A sleeping mat, a bucket for waste, a small barred window too high to see out of properly, a bare bulb that burns 24 hours a day. He rolls out the mat and sits down. The concrete is cold beneath him. Outside, the wind howls off the ocean. 27 years stretch ahead, though he does not know the number yet. He knows only that he is 46 years old, and this cell may be the last place he ever knows. But the warder is wrong about one thing. This is not where Nelson Mandela will die. This is where he will become unbreakable. Chapter 10. The Island of Stone. The first morning arrives with a bell at 5:30. The prisoners are ordered to roll up their sleeping mats, to stand for inspection, to empty their waste buckets. The routine is designed to erase individuality, to reduce men to numbers and functions. Nelson becomes prisoner 46664, the 466th prisoner, to arrive in 1964. His cell is a rectangle of concrete and iron, 2 meters wide, 2 meters long. When he stretches out his arms, he can nearly touch both walls. The ceiling is high enough to stand, but the space is so small that pacing is impossible. 3 steps in one direction, turn, 3 steps back. A sleeping mat that must be rolled each morning and unrolled each night. A small shelf for his few possessions, a tin cup, a plate, toiletries. Fellow prisoners will later help him construct additional shelves from cardboard and matchboxes for his growing collection of books. The barred window sits high on the wall, letting in light, but offering no view except a small rectangle of sky. The bulb burns constantly, day and night, making sleep difficult, turning darkness into a perpetual gray twilight. There is no bed, no furniture, no privacy. A bucket in the corner serves as a toilet, the smell pervasive in the small space. The other political prisoners are housed in the same section, each man isolated in his own cell. They are forbidden from talking to one another outside of designated times. The guards patrol constantly, listening for violations, ready to punish the smallest infraction. As a D-group prisoner, Nelson receives the lowest classification. He's allowed 1 letter every 6 months, censored heavily, with words and sentences blacked out by prison authorities. He is permitted 1 visit every 6 months, 30 minutes long, conducted through a glass partition with guards listening to every word. The visits are their own kind of torture. Winnie must travel from Johannesburg to Cape Town, a long and expensive journey. She arrives to see her husband behind glass, forbidden to touch him, their words monitored and restricted. They talk about nothing important, because anything important will be censored. The children are growing up without him. His mother is aging. The world is moving on, and there is no indication when, or if, he will ever leave this place. The rations are meager and deliberately unequal. Black prisoners receive less food than Indian or colored prisoners, who in turn receive less than white prisoners would. Breakfast is porridge made from maize. Lunch is more maize porridge, sometimes with a few boiled vegetables. Supper is the same. The diet is designed to keep them alive, but weakened. Even clothing is a marker of degradation. The shorts and sandals are mandatory, regardless of weather. Winter on the island is brutal. Cold winds blow in from the Antarctic, temperatures drop, and the prisoners work outside in their thin garments. Nelson and his comrades protest this indignity. They demand long trousers. The request is denied again and again, but they persist. It becomes a matter of principle. If they can win this small dignity, they prove that the system can be challenged. At night, lying on the thin mat with the bulb burning overhead, Nelson listens to the wind and the ocean. The isolation is profound. The outside world feels impossibly distant, but his mind remains free. He thinks about the struggle, about Winnie and the children, about the country he is fighting for. The walls can contain his body. They cannot contain his spirit. Not yet, not ever. Chapter 11. Breaking Limestone. The quarry is located in the center of the island, a deep pit carved into the earth where white limestone lies in thick seams. Each morning after breakfast, the prisoners are marched there in single file, guards watching their every step. The work is simple and brutal. Dig out limestone, break it into smaller pieces with hammers and picks, load it into wheelbarrows. Repeat. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year. Nelson grips the hammer and feels the shock travel up his arms with each strike. The limestone is hard, resistant. It takes dozens of blows to break a single large piece into manageable chunks. His hands blister, then callous, then blister again. But the true torture is not the physical labor. It is the glare. The white stone reflects the South African sun with blinding intensity. The quarry becomes a bowl of light so fierce it sears the eyes. The prisoners are not given sunglasses. They are not given hats with brims. They must work in this blazing whiteness for 8, sometimes 10 hours a day. Nelson begins to notice the damage within months. His eyes water constantly. He squints even in dim light. The other prisoners suffer the same. Headaches, sensitivity, a condition the doctors will later call snow blindness. The damage is permanent. For the rest of his life, his eyes will be weakened from those years of reflected glare off white stone. The guards enforce strict rules. No talking while working, no singing, no communication between prisoners except during the brief lunch break. Violators are reported and punished. Reduced rations, solitary confinement, sometimes beatings delivered out of sight. But the prisoners find ways to resist these small tyrannies. They develop a system of whispered conversations. When guards patrol the far side of the quarry, they pass messages hidden in lunch tins. They hum the same tune simultaneously, not quite singing, but close enough to feel solidarity. Nelson becomes a leader even here. During lunch breaks, sitting in the meager shade, he organizes discussions. They debate politics, philosophy, strategy. They teach one another. Those who know history share it. Those who understand economics explain it. The quarry becomes an informal university, knowledge passed from prisoner to prisoner. When new prisoners arrive, frightened and disoriented, the older inmates counsel them. Nelson tells them to be strong, to endure, to remember that this is temporary, even when it feels eternal. The hunger strikes begin as a form of protest. The food is insufficient, the treatment degrading, the conditions inhuman. If they refuse to eat, the guards must explain to their superiors why prisoners are starving. If word reaches the outside world, it creates pressure. But hunger strikes are dangerous. The authorities simply wait. They do not negotiate with starving prisoners. Men grow weak, collapse in the quarry, are carried back to their cells. The strikes fail more often than they succeed. Still they try. Each protest, each small act of defiance, is a way of asserting their humanity in a place designed to strip it away. Years pass in the quarry. Nelson's body grows leaner, harder. His shoulders and arms develop a wiry strength from the endless hammering. His hands are permanently scarred. His eyes weaken steadily under the relentless glare. But something else happens, too. The quarry becomes a place of unexpected camaraderie. Working side by side, these men, lawyers, teachers, laborers, activists, form bonds that transcend their individual suffering. They share what little they have. They protect one another. They refuse to let the system break them individually by staying strong collectively. At night, back in his cell, Nelson's body aches. His eyes burn. His hands throb. But his mind remains clear. The limestone will not break him. The glare will not blind him to the future. He endures. Chapter 12. Letters Through Censored Walls. The letters arrive irregularly, unpredictably. Sometimes months pass with nothing. Then a guard appears at the cell door with an envelope already opened, already violated by censors. Nelson unfolds the pages carefully. Entire sentences have been blacked out with thick ink. Sometimes only fragments remain, a word here, a phrase there. He holds the paper up to the light, trying to read through the censorship. But the ink is deliberately opaque. Winnie writes about the children. She writes about police harassment, about banning orders that restrict her movements, about the constant surveillance that has become her life. But these details often disappear beneath the censor's pen. What remains are surface pleasantries, drained of meaning. The children are well. I hope you are keeping healthy. Words chosen carefully to pass inspection, stripped of intimacy, of real communication. Nelson writes back with the same caution. He knows every word will be read by hostile eyes. He cannot express his true thoughts, his frustrations, his longing. Instead, he writes about prison routines, about his health, about abstract hopes for the future. Although these precious letters do not reach you, I shall nevertheless keep on trying by writing whenever that is possible. He writes this sentence knowing the irony. The letter itself is evidence that some communication reaches her, yet so much is lost in the black ink and scissored gaps. In the early years, the censors simply blacked out objectionable passages. But the prisoners discovered they could still read the words by holding the paper at an angle, catching the shadow of the text beneath the ink. And so the censorship became more severe. Now the authorities cut out entire sections with scissors or razors, reducing letters to confetti, to fragments barely held together. Winnie saves every letter, even the shredded ones. She pieces them together like puzzles, trying to recover what was taken. The visits are even harder than the letters. Every 6 months, if permission is granted, Winnie makes the long journey from Johannesburg to Cape Town. The trip is expensive. She must arrange care for the children, take time away from work, endure the humiliation of prison security procedures. When she finally reaches the visiting room, a thick glass wall separates them. They sit in cubicles, speaking through telephones, while guards listen to every word. They cannot touch. They cannot embrace. After years of marriage, they communicate like strangers, making a formal phone call. Winnie ages before his eyes. The vibrant young woman he married is becoming someone else, hardened by harassment, by poverty, by raising daughters alone, while her husband sits in prison for a crime he does not regret. The daughters, Zini and Zinzi, must wait until they turn 16 before they are permitted to visit. 16 years old before they can see their father through glass. They were small children when he was arrested. They become young women without him. The restrictions are calculated cruelty. The government knows that isolation from family is one of the most effective ways to break a prisoner's spirit. In 1968, word reaches Nelson that his mother has died. He requests permission to attend her funeral. The request is denied. In 1969, his eldest son, Thembi, dies in a car accident at age 24. Again, Nelson requests permission to attend the funeral. Again, denied. He receives these notifications in his cell, alone, with no way to grieve properly, no way to say goodbye, no way to comfort his remaining family. After Thembi's death, Nelson writes to Winnie, "The feeling of anguish and depression that had hit me so viciously when I received the horrible news of his death returned. But even grief must be expressed carefully, constrained by censorship. 21 years will pass before Nelson can hold Winnie again without glass between them." Chapter 13. The Exercises of Survival. Every morning at 5 o'clock, before the wake-up bell rings, Nelson Mandela is already awake. In the small space of his cell, he begins his ritual: push-ups, sit-ups, running in place. Stretching exercises that keep his muscles from atrophying, his joints from stiffening. The concrete floor is hard and cold, but he ignores this. The routine is not optional. It is survival. In prison, having an outlet for my frustrations was absolutely essential, he will later write. Before his arrest, Nelson ran 4 mornings a week through the streets of Soweto. 3 evenings a week, he trained at a boxing gym, losing himself in the rhythm of footwork and punches, in something that was not the struggle. The exercise cleared his mind, prepared him for the battles ahead. In prison, the exercise serves a different purpose. It is resistance. It is proof that he controls something, even if only his own body. The prison authorities can dictate his movements, his associations, his mail, but they cannot stop him from standing in his cell at dawn and doing push-ups. The monotony of prison life is its own form of torture. As Nelson describes it, prison life is about routine, each day like the one before, each week like the one before it, so that the months and years blend into each other. Wake at 5:30, roll up mat, empty bucket, eat porridge, march to quarry, break stone, eat lunch, break more stone, return to cells, eat supper, sleep, repeat. The sameness threatens to erase time itself, to turn years into an indistinguishable gray mass. Some prisoners lose track of dates, of seasons. They measure time only in sentences served, in years remaining. But Nelson refuses to let time become meaningless. He marks his calendar. He notes birthdays, anniversaries, political events in the outside world that he learns about through smuggled newspapers. He treats each day as distinct, as part of a larger story still being written. Study becomes another form of resistance. Despite the physical exhaustion of quarry work, Nelson reads by the dim light of his cell each evening. He studies Afrikaans, the language of his oppressors, believing that to defeat them, he must understand them. He enrolls in a law degree through the University of London's correspondence program. The books arrive slowly, subject to censorship. Legal texts are examined page by page for hidden messages. Sometimes books are banned outright, deemed too dangerous, but enough material filters through that Nelson can continue his education. In 1989, after 27 years of interrupted study, he finally earns his Bachelor of Laws degree. He is 70 years old. Late at night, lying on his mat with the bulb still burning overhead, Nelson reflects on endurance. The quarry has damaged his eyes. The cold has seeped into his bones. The isolation has cost him his family. But he is not broken. His body is a prisoner. His mind remains free. Prisoner 46664 sleeps and wakes and begins again. Chapter 14. The Growing Legend. In the 1970s, something remarkable begins to happen. Outside the prison walls, beyond the censored letters and restricted visits, Nelson Mandela becomes more than a man. He becomes a symbol. The apartheid government has tried to erase him. They banned his image from publication. They prohibited newspapers from printing his words or even mentioning his name. Possessing a photograph of Mandela is illegal. An entire generation of South Africans grows up knowing only whispers that there is a man on an island, that he has been there for years, that he will not submit. But silence creates mythology. The less visible Mandela becomes inside South Africa, the more his legend grows internationally. Student movements in Europe and America adopt his cause. Musicians write protest songs. Activists organize rallies outside South African embassies. Free Nelson Mandela becomes a rallying cry that echoes across continents. In 1980, a South African newspaper editor publishes an editorial calling for Mandela's release. It is the first time in years his name has appeared in print domestically. The government prosecutes the editor, but the damage is done. People remember. They begin to speak his name again. On Robben Island, the prisoners sense the shifting atmosphere. Guards become slightly less brutal. Rules are enforced with marginally less severity. The small changes suggest that international pressure is having an effect. In 1982, after 18 years on the island, Nelson and several other senior political prisoners are transferred. Without warning, they are taken from their cells, flown to Cape Town, and driven to Pollsmoor Prison, a maximum security facility on the mainland. Pollsmoor is different. Instead of individual cells, they are housed together in a large communal cell. Instead of sleeping on mats, they have beds. The food is slightly better. They are no longer forced to work in the quarry. But the isolation from other prisoners is more complete. On Robben Island, despite restrictions, there was a community of political prisoners. At Pollsmoor, they are separated from the general population, locked in their section, cut off. Still, Nelson's classification has improved over the years. He is no longer D group. He is now A group, which means more privileges, more letters, more visits, access to newspapers, though censored, books, even a radio eventually. He turned 64 in prison, then 65, then 66. The years accumulate like sediment, layer upon layer. His hair, once black, has gone gray. His face, once smooth, is lined with age. His body, once powerful, has been worn down by hard labor and inadequate food. But his mind remains sharp. His conviction remains absolute. In the mid-1980s, international pressure intensifies. Countries impose economic sanctions on South Africa. Corporations divest. Sports teams refuse to play against South African teams. The isolation that was meant for Mandela now encircles the entire country. Inside South Africa, townships burn. The United Democratic Front organizes mass resistance. Young people who never knew life before apartheid are willing to die fighting it. The government responds with violence, states of emergency, mass arrests, killings. The country is tearing itself apart. And increasingly, both sides recognize that Nelson Mandela, the prisoner, the legend, the symbol, may be the only person capable of preventing complete catastrophe. In 1985, President P.W. Botha offers Mandela conditional release. He must renounce violence. He must acknowledge the government's legitimacy. From his cell in Pollsmoor, Mandela writes his response. It is read publicly by his daughter Zinzi at a rally. What freedom am I being offered while the organization of the people remains banned? Only free men can negotiate. A prisoner cannot enter into contracts. He remains in prison. But the world is listening now. Chapter 15. Secret Negotiations. By the late 1980s, the apartheid government faces an impossible situation. The economy is collapsing under international sanctions. Townships are ungovernable. Young activists have made the country unrulable. Violence escalates daily. Bombings, riots, police shootings, funerals that turn into protests, that turn into massacres. The government cannot win militarily. The resistance cannot be crushed, and everyone knows it. In 1988, secret talks begin. Government officials visit Mandela at Pollsmoor Prison, testing whether negotiation is possible. Justice Minister Kobe Coetzee meets with him quietly, away from public scrutiny. They drink tea. They talk carefully, circling around the central questions. Can there be peace? Can there be compromise? Can this man, after nearly 3 decades in prison, still lead his people toward something other than revenge. Mandela is cautious, but engaged. He knows these conversations are dangerous politically. His comrades might see them as capitulation, but he also knows that the violence will consume the country unless someone begins talking. In February 1989, P.W. Botha suffers a stroke. F.W. de Klerk becomes president in September, a man considered more pragmatic than his predecessor, though still very much a product of the apartheid system. In December 1989, Mandela meets de Klerk for the first time. Prison officials order a 3-piece suit for the occasion, the first proper clothing Mandela has worn in years. He is driven to Tuynhuys, the presidential residence in Cape Town. The two men sit across from each other. De Klerk is polished, a lawyer by training, formal but not hostile. Mandela is 71 years old, gray-haired, still possessed of a quiet dignity despite the circumstances. They discuss the future of South Africa. They discuss the possibility of Mandela's release. They discuss terms. It is cordial but wary. Each man knows the other represents forces larger than themselves. De Klerk represents a government trying to reform apartheid without surrendering power. Mandela represents a movement that will accept nothing less than majority rule. After the meeting, de Klerk returns to his office, thinking about what he has just set in motion. Mandela returns to prison, thinking about what comes next. On February 2, 1990, de Klerk stands before Parliament and delivers a speech that stuns the nation. He unbans the ANC. He unbans the Pan-Africanist Congress. He unbans the Communist Party. He announces that Nelson Mandela will be released unconditionally. The world holds its breath. 9 days later, everything changes. Chapter 16. Walking Free, February 11, 1990. The morning breaks cold and bright over Cape Town. Inside Victor Verster Prison, where Mandela has been held in a separate cottage for the past year under slightly less restrictive conditions, preparations are underway. Television crews gather outside the prison gates. Journalists arrive from every corner of the globe. Helicopters circle overhead. The world has been waiting for this moment, though many South Africans have grown up never expecting to see it. Mandela wakes early, as always. He exercises. He dresses carefully in a dark suit. Winnie arrives at the prison with a small entourage. After 27 years of glass partitions and monitored phone calls, they will walk out together. But there is tension beneath the joy. Their relationship has been strained by the decades of separation. Winnie has become a political figure in her own right, sometimes controversial, sometimes militant. She has survived police harassment, imprisonment, and exile to a remote rural town. She is no longer the young woman who married him in 1958, and Nelson is no longer the young revolutionary who went to prison in 1964. He is 71 years old. His hair is gray. His face is deeply lined. An entire generation has grown up knowing him only as a name, a symbol, a photograph banned from publication. The prison authorities tell him the release will happen at 3 p.m. Then they change it to 4 p.m. The crowd outside swells. Thousands, then tens of thousands, gathering along the route from the prison to Cape Town. People wave ANC flags, illegal until 9 days ago. They sing freedom songs. They wait. At 4:15 p.m., Nelson and Winnie walk through the gates of Victor Verster Prison. The moment is electric. Television cameras capture it live. Photographers' shutters click in a frantic rhythm. The crowd erupts in cheers so loud they drown out all other sound. Nelson raises his right fist in the air, the ANC salute, the symbol of resistance. Beside him, Winnie raises hers. They walk slowly, deliberately, through the throng of people pressing close, reaching out to touch them, to witness this impossible moment. A car waits to drive them to Cape Town, to the grand parade outside City Hall, where a rally has been organized. The 60-kilometer journey becomes a procession. People line the roads. They wave from windows, from rooftops. They hold children up to see. This is history, and everyone knows it. But the day does not go smoothly. The crowd at the Grand Parade has grown enormous. Estimates range from 50,000 to 100,000 people. The mood is celebratory but chaotic. When Mandela's car finally arrives, hours later than planned, the crush of people makes movement nearly impossible. Security is overwhelmed. The organizers struggle to maintain order. Eventually, Mandela and Winnie make their way onto the balcony of City Hall. Below them, the sea of faces stretches as far as they can see. Nelson steps to the microphone. The crowd roars. He raises his hand for silence. It takes long minutes for the noise to subside. When he finally speaks, his voice is strong but measured. This is not a moment for anger, but neither is it a moment for weakness. He thanks the people for their support. He honors Oliver Tambo, his old friend still in exile, too ill to return. He acknowledges the struggle that continues, but then he says something that surprises many in the crowd. He calls for the continuation of armed struggle until the government meets their demands. He calls for the maintenance of international sanctions. He insists that negotiations must happen, but only from a position of strength. Some had expected reconciliation and softness. Instead, they get a revolutionary who has not been broken by 27 years in prison, a man who still believes in the fight. The speech is broadcast live across South Africa and around the world. In townships, people gather around televisions and radios. In white suburbs, families watch with a mixture of hope and fear. What kind of man has emerged from Robben Island? A peacemaker or a warrior? The answer, as it will become clear, is both. After the speech, after the rally, after the interviews and the photographs, Nelson returns to the small house in Soweto, 8115 Vilakazi Street, where he lived before his arrest. The same matchbox house in the same township, now surrounded by crowds who refuse to leave, who want just to be near him. Inside, away from the cameras, Nelson sits in the small front room and feels the weight of freedom. For 27 years, every decision was made for him. When to wake, what to eat, where to stand, how to spend each hour. Now suddenly, he must choose everything. The next morning, he wakes at 5 a.m. out of habit. He begins his exercise routine, the same routine he performed in his cell. His body knows no other way. The doorbell rings constantly. Journalists request interviews. Politicians want meetings. Foreign diplomats offer congratulations. Family members arrive. Friends he has not seen in decades embrace him. The world wants something from Nelson Mandela. The ANC needs him to lead. The government wants him to negotiate. International observers hope he can prevent civil war. Black South Africans see him as a savior. White South Africans fear him as a threat. He is free, but he is not yet free. The struggle, he knows, has only entered a new phase. The years in prison were preparation. The real work, building a democratic South Africa, preventing racial war, negotiating with enemies, holding together a fractured movement, all of this lies ahead. At 71, after 27 years in prison, most men would rest. Nelson Mandela goes back to work. Chapter 17. Negotiating the Impossible. The months following Mandela's release are chaotic and violent. Across South Africa, tension escalates. In the townships, supporters of the ANC clash with members of the Inkatha Freedom Party. a Zulu nationalist organization. Police stand by, or worse, seem to encourage the violence. Bodies pile up weekly. Evidence emerges of a shadowy third force, elements within the security apparatus working to destabilize the country, to derail negotiations before they can begin. They fund militant groups, they provide weapons, they orchestrate massacres designed to pit black South Africans against one another. Mandela's relationship with F.W. de Klerk grows strained. In public, they present a united front, two leaders working toward peace. In private, Mandela accuses de Klerk of tolerating, perhaps even enabling, the violence. De Klerk denies knowledge. The trust between them is fragile, constantly tested. Yet somehow negotiations continue. In December 1991, the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, CODESA, convenes. Representatives from 19 political parties gather to discuss the country's future. It is unprecedented. The apartheid government sitting at the same table as the liberation movements they once banned, white supremacists negotiating with those they deemed inferior. The talks are tense, technical, exhausting. Constitutional structures, electoral systems, minority protections, land reform. Each issue carries the weight of centuries of oppression and decades of resistance. Mandela proves to be a masterful negotiator. He knows when to be firm and when to compromise. He understands that de Klerk needs victories to bring back to his constituents, just as Mandela needs to deliver for his. They are trapped in a delicate dance, each man needing the other to succeed, each representing constituencies that want very different outcomes. In 1991, at the ANC's first legal national conference inside South Africa in decades, Mandela is elected president of the organization. His old friend Oliver Tambo, who led the ANC in exile for 30 years, becomes national chairperson, but is too ill to take an active role. The mantle has passed. The negotiations nearly collapse several times. In June 1992, in the township of Boipatong, 45 people are massacred. Evidence suggests police complicity. Mandela suspends talks, demands accountability. The country teeters on the brink, but always they return to the table, because the alternative is civil war. In March 1992, de Klerk holds a referendum, whites only, asking whether they support the continuation of negotiations. It is a calculated risk. If white voters say no, the process ends. Conservative parties campaign against it, calling de Klerk a traitor. 68% vote yes. It is not a referendum on majority rule. Most white voters still hope for some power-sharing arrangement that preserves their privilege. But it is permission to continue talking. And that is enough. Slowly, painfully, an agreement takes shape. There will be elections, universal suffrage, one person, one vote, a new constitution, protections for minorities, a government of national unity that will include all major parties for the first transition period. The date is set, April 27, 1994. For the first time in South Africa's history, black citizens will vote. As the day approaches, right-wing extremists threaten violence. Bombs explode in Johannesburg. Militant groups vow to disrupt the elections. The country holds its breath. But on April 27th, something miraculous happens. People wake before dawn and walk to polling stations. Lines stretch for miles. Elderly people who never thought they would live to see this day. Young people voting for the first time. Former prisoners and former guards standing in the same queues. They wait patiently, sometimes for hours in the sun. When they finally receive their ballots, many cry. They mark their choices carefully, reverently. They place the paper in the box. Nelson Mandela votes in Durban, his ballot broadcast around the world. He is 75 years old. He spent 27 years in prison for the right to this moment. 3 days later, the results are announced. The ANC wins 62% of the vote. Nelson Mandela will be president. Chapter 18. President Mandela, May 10, 1994. Pretoria. The Union buildings stand against a brilliant autumn sky, their sandstone facades glowing in the morning light. Dignitaries from around the world gather on the terraced amphitheater. Presidents and prime ministers, princes and activists, celebrities and freedom fighters, they have come to witness the impossible. Nelson Mandela, 75 years old, former prisoner 46664, is about to be inaugurated as the first democratically elected president of South Africa. The ceremony is choreographed carefully, laden with symbolism. 4 South African jets fly overhead, trailing the colors of the new flag, red, blue, green, gold, black, white, representing all the nation's people. The symbolism is deliberate. The same Air Force that once served the apartheid state now salutes its first black president. Mandela takes the oath of office, his hand raised, his voice steady. Beside him stand Thabo Mbeki and F.W. de Klerk as deputy presidents, representing the government of national unity that will guide the transition. In his inaugural address, Mandela speaks of healing and reconciliation. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. But the poetry of the moment cannot obscure the enormity of the task ahead. Mandela inherits a country fractured by centuries of racial oppression. The wealth gap between white and black South Africans is staggering. Most black citizens lack basic services: running water, electricity, adequate housing, quality education, health care. The townships remain desperately poor. Unemployment is rampant. The AIDS epidemic is beginning to spread, though few yet grasp its magnitude. Crime is rising. The economy is fragile. And Mandela must lead a coalition government that includes his former oppressors, must somehow forge unity from deep division. He approaches the work with characteristic discipline. He arrives at the office early each morning, wearing the suits he has become known for, impeccably tailored, projecting authority and dignity. He works late into the evening, reading briefs, meeting with advisors, making the 1,000 decisions required of a head of state. But he also understands the power of symbols. In 1995, when South Africa hosts the Rugby World Cup, Mandela does something that shocks many of his supporters. Rugby has long been the sport of white Afrikaners, a symbol of the apartheid regime. The national team, the Springboks, represents everything the liberation movement fought against. Yet when South Africa reaches the final, Mandela appears in the stadium wearing a Springbok jersey, number 6, the number of the team's captain, Francois Pienaar. The predominantly white crowd erupts. "Nelson! Nelson!" they chant, many seeing him as their president for the first time. When South Africa wins the match, Pienaar hands the trophy to Mandela, and for a moment, the country feels unified. It is a brilliant piece of political theater, but it also reveals Mandela's deepest conviction. Reconciliation is not optional. It is the only path forward. He establishes the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 1995, appointing Archbishop Desmond Tutu as chairman. The commission's mandate is extraordinary: investigate apartheid-era human rights violations, allow victims to testify, grant amnesty to perpetrators who confess fully. It is justice of a different kind, not retribution, but truth-telling, not punishment, but acknowledgement. The hearings begin in 1996. For 2 years, South Africans watch on television as victims describe torture, assassination, disappearances. Perpetrators confess to bombings, murders, atrocities. The nation is forced to confront its past in excruciating detail. Some find it healing, others find it insufficient. Many victims feel that amnesty is too generous, that justice demands more than confession. But Mandela believes it is necessary to prevent cycles of revenge. On the policy front, his government expands access to water and electricity. They build houses, 750,000 over 5 years. They introduce free health care for children and pregnant women. They expand social welfare grants to previously excluded groups. But the economic transformation is slower, more cautious than some hoped. Mandela retains much of the previous government's liberal economic framework, despite his own socialist leanings. He believes radical change might destabilize the economy, might frighten foreign investors. It is a compromise that disappoints the left wing of the ANC, but Mandela prioritizes stability over ideology. At home, his personal life finds unexpected grace. In 1996, he and Winnie divorce, the marriage a casualty of decades apart and diverging paths. On his 80th birthday in 1998, he marries Graça Machel, the widow of Mozambique's former president. Chapter 19. Truth and Reconciliation. The hearings take place in community halls, churches, and civic centers across South Africa. Simple rooms with folding chairs and microphones, where extraordinary testimonies unfold. Victims come forward, 21,000 of them eventually. Mothers whose sons disappeared in police custody, torture survivors bearing scars decades old, widows whose husbands were assassinated. They speak into the microphones, their voices sometimes steady, sometimes breaking. Archbishop Desmond Tutu presides with both compassion and moral authority. He listens to the testimonies, often weeping openly. The pain is immense, the catalogue of cruelty almost unbearable. But the Commission's most controversial work involves the perpetrators. Those who committed political crimes during the apartheid era can apply for amnesty. If they confess fully, if the crimes were politically motivated, if they show complete disclosure, they can receive immunity from prosecution. It is a bargain Mandela considers necessary. Without the promise of amnesty, the security forces might have sabotaged the transition. Without truth-telling, the nation cannot heal. But for victims, watching their torturers walk free after confessing feels like justice denied. 7,000 applications for amnesty are submitted. Only 849 are granted. The rest are rejected for incomplete disclosure or crimes that were not politically motivated. The hearings are televised. South Africa watches as police officers describe murders they committed, as soldiers confess to bombing campaigns, as operatives detail assassinations. The banality of evil becomes horrifyingly clear. Ordinary people committing atrocities because they were following orders, because they believed they were protecting white civilization, because the system told them it was right. The Commission also investigates the liberation movements. The ANC must account for human rights violations in its military camps, for torture of suspected informers, for civilian deaths caused by bombings. Both F.W. de Klerk and Thabo Mbeki appeal to have portions of the final report suppressed. De Klerk succeeds in blocking some findings about his knowledge of state-sponsored violence. Mbeki objects to the ANC being equated with the apartheid government. In October 1998, the Commission releases its final report, 5 volumes documenting decades of systematic human rights abuses. The apartheid government is found to be the primary perpetrator, responsible for widespread torture, assassination, and oppression. Mandela praises the Commission's work. It has helped us move away from the past to concentrate on the present and the future. But the reparations promised to victims are slow to materialize. The government, facing budget constraints, does not implement the Commission's recommendations fully. Many victims feel abandoned, asked to forgive, to help the nation heal, but left without meaningful compensation or support. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission becomes a model studied worldwide. Other countries emerging from conflict look to South Africa's example, but it remains controversial, an imperfect attempt at impossible justice. Mandela believes it was necessary, not perfect, but necessary. Forgiveness, he knows, is harder than revenge, but it is the only path forward. Chapter 20. The Long Goodbye. In 1999, Nelson Mandela keeps his promise. He steps down after one term as president, handing power to Thabo Mbeki in South Africa's second democratic election. He is 80 years old, and he has done what he set out to do. Most leaders cling to power. Mandela walks away. He retires to Kunu, the village of his childhood, where the green hills still roll beneath vast skies. Here he can wake without the weight of state business, can walk without security details hovering, can simply be an old man remembering. But retirement is not rest. He establishes the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, pouring resources into education and welfare for South Africa's youth. He speaks out about the AIDS epidemic, becoming more vocal after his own son, Magatho, dies of AIDS-related illness in 2005. He travels the world as an elder statesman, mediating conflicts, advocating for peace, lending his moral authority to causes he believes in. He serves as Secretary General of the Non-Aligned Movement. He negotiates in the Pan Am Flight 103 bombing trial. But time, which prison could not steal, begins to take its toll. The lung damage from the quarry years returns as chronic infections. He is hospitalized repeatedly, 2011, 2012, 2013. Each time, the nation holds its breath. His last public appearance is at the 2010 World Cup final in South Africa. He appears briefly, waving to the crowd, then retreats. The world will not see him again. By 2013, his health is failing irreversibly. In June, he is hospitalized with a severe lung infection. His condition is critical. The family gathers. The nation prepares. He is moved home to Johannesburg to die surrounded by family rather than hospital machines. Graça Machel sits vigil. His daughters visit. Grandchildren come to say goodbye. Outside his home in Houghton, people gather to light candles, to sing, to pray. They know the end is near. On December 5, 2013, at 8:50 p.m., Nelson Mandela dies. He is 95 years old. President Jacob Zuma announces it to the nation. Our nation has lost its greatest son. Our people have lost a father. Around the world, flags lower to half-staff. Leaders issue statements. Ordinary people who never met him weep as if they have lost someone they knew personally. 10 days of national mourning follow. Memorial services fill stadiums. On December 15th in Kunu, beneath the hills where he herded cattle as a boy, Nelson Mandela is buried. The mourners include presidents and paupers, celebrities and comrades, those who knew him and those who only knew his name. They bury a man who spent 27 years in prison and emerged without bitterness. They bury the last great liberator of the 20th century. They bury Nelson Mandela, but not what he represented. That remains. At end, we return to the question we began with: why could Nelson Mandela not be broken? The answer, perhaps, lies not in what they did to him, but in what he refused to let them take. They imprisoned his body for 27 years. They damaged his eyes in the quarry. They kept him from his children. from his mother's funeral, from his son's burial. They tried to erase his name, to make him forgotten. But they could not touch the thing that mattered most, his vision of what South Africa could become. He remained unbroken because he never defined himself by his oppressors. He was not a victim of apartheid. He was an architect of freedom. The difference is everything. Today, South Africa struggles with the promises he made. Inequality persists. Corruption festers. The rainbow nation he envisioned remains incomplete, imperfect. But democracy endures, and that too is his legacy. As you drift toward sleep tonight, remember this. Strength is not the absence of suffering. It is the refusal to let suffering have the final word. Nelson Mandela walked out of prison without bitterness. He led without vengeance. He forgave without forgetting. And in doing so, he showed the world what it means to be truly unbreakable. Sweet dreams, and we'll meet again soon for another story.